Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis, and I'm your host. Thank you so much for tuning in. For Valentine's Day, I actually did a webinar. It was a panel where I spoke with Ramona Ortega. We're talking about just couples and money. It's called For the Love of Money. We thought it was appropriate for, Valentine's Day and February being the month of love, right? So we wanted to help couples to talk about how to plan for joint goals, whether or not they should have joint accounts. We talked about financial fidelity, how to plan for the future, all kinds of stuff. We thought it'd be very appropriate. So if you are in a relationship, or someone who is in a relationship and they haven't quite, joined finances yet, this would be a great episode for you. Just a little bit about Ramona. She is the CEO and founder of WealthBuild, which is an AI-powered financial co-pilot that helps people make smarter financial decisions and build wealth. And she's also the founder of My Money, My Future, which is a financial literacy and inclusion platform. So we had a great conversation. For those that missed it, we wanted to just replay this as a podcast episode since we did it live on Valentine's Day. So here's the episode. I hope you enjoy it.
We are here gathering and just sort of getting ready for us to go live with our webinar. We're very excited to have this conversation today. Happy Valentine's, everyone. What are you doing, Luis? What are you doing that's special today?
Yes, great timing. Believe it or not, it's very appropriate. I actually just came from an estate planning attorney's office because my wife and I created our trust about 3 years ago, and we're just updating our documents. Very romantic.
It is. It's perfect segue into our conversation today. It is 12 o'clock. We're going to get started. My name is Ramona Ortega. I am the founder of WealthBuild.ai and My Money, My Future, which runs the Thrive campaign, a national initiative sponsored in partnership with the NASDAQ Foundation. And we focus on investor education. So this is one of many webinars that we will be having this year as part of our Thrive initiative. And super excited to be celebrating Valentine's in the best way, which is how to ensure that couples stay together and build intergenerational wealth. So today I have Luis Rosa, CFP, and a good friend of ours here at Thrive. We've done a lot of work together. Luis works in building plans around financial independence and wealth building and generational wealth through his practice. And so he's going to share a little bit about that. And we're going to have a really important conversation today about love and money and what the kinds of conversations that you need to be having, what needs to be top of mind if you're about to be coupled, if you're already coupled, perhaps you're uncoupling because there's some financial decisions there. But we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to be talking through these important topics. And so welcome, Luis. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Ramona. It's a pleasure. No, it's a pleasure and an honor. And I'm glad that we're having this conversation, especially today. I think that when you look at the statistics, unfortunately, divorce is still somewhere around 50%, right, for all marriages today. And I think that money plays a huge role in the reason for that. So hopefully there's some takeaways here today that we want to share with you guys to not fall into that wrong side of the statistic.
That's right. Actually, financial concerns is one of the top 3 reasons for divorce. So that's actually why we wanted to have this conversation, is that it can be very expensive. And for all you ladies out there, we end up bearing the brunt of a lot of financial problems, particularly post-divorce. So we want to make sure that everyone has that information. And by the way, this is just a great way to have deep conversations about your values, about your future, about what you find important in your lives. And so it's going to creep into everything. So we might as well get comfortable talking about it. I think that we have 3 topics and that we're going to cover today, but we're probably going to get into a lot of other things. And so those 3 topics are whether or not you should get a prenup. We're going to talk about sort of banking options and whether you should have a joint account. It's a question I get all the time. And then we're going to talk a little bit about retirement planning, including how to care for sort of your loved ones. A lot of people are taking care of their parents and how to be thinking about that in the context of your marriage. So excited to dig into this. Let's get started. Right off, I know this is a big question that a lot of people have. Should I get a prenup? And it's obviously a state question. So we want to kind of get into that. What sort of off the top of your head, what are the things that you recommend if someone comes to you? Is what are things that you're thinking about? And before you start, I just want to remember that we are giving this information out as educational information. We are not your financial advisors. We are not your lawyers. We hope you'll talk to us very soon to get a financial plan with a certified financial planner. But today's content is purely educational. So, Luis, go ahead and kick us off with prenup, no prenup.
Yeah, that's great, Ramona. Yeah, I think this is mainly about giving you an opportunity to start thinking about what questions should I start asking, and then reach out to those professionals. So when it comes to prenup, it's the least romantic thing you could bring up, right? As you can imagine, right? Because then immediately someone might think you don't trust them because you're like, oh, why are you already thinking about us breaking up? But in reality there are circumstances where it's just a matter of protecting yourself and your loved ones. Think about, for example, if you are in a second relationship, right? And you have a prior relationship, maybe you have children from a prior marriage or relationship. You don't necessarily want your new spouse to take half of everything in the case of a divorce, because then you'll be doing a disservice to your children from a prior marriage, right? So in certain scenarios like that, it might actually make sense to have a prenuptial agreement. And also, like you said, Ramona, it depends on the state that you live. There are some community property states where once you get married, all of the property is considered joint. So if you've already accumulated a house and other assets, you may want to protect those, because unfortunately the stats are what they are, right? So a lot of the, relationships end up in divorce, and you just want to protect yourself.
That's right. And I always say, if you can't have these conversations, then you're probably going to not be able to have a lot more conversations. So it might be a little bit of a red flag. So you want to have those conversations up front. I have some sort of rules of thumb. If someone was to ask me as a lawyer, I would say, look, if you are coming into the relationship with a significant amount of assets, so you already own a home, you have a business, perhaps you did have a prior family and obligations there, absolutely you should be thinking about a prenup. It's just also a way to keep things pretty clean in terms of estate planning, particularly if there's children involved. But I think if you are starting out and both of you are coming to the table with sort of zero, maybe not, but I think you can still have the conversation. It sparks other conversations about money, which are important to be having. The other thing is, if there's a power imbalance, and I know this is a touchy topic, but are you a younger woman with a very older man, or switch that, whatever. If there's a sort of other types of power imbalances, perhaps you're someone who's never had a job or a career, and your spouse has a very long-term career, there's going to be sort of different kinds of imbalances that I think a prenup often tends to work around, right? And so just being sort of straightforward from the get-go is probably your best bet.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you bring up the important conversation aspect of it, because this does open the gateway to say, hey, what else do we need to talk about? Like debt and joint account or not, and how much do you have in your 401k, and do you have student loans, right? Because those are the conversations that really need to be had very early on in the relationship, because otherwise it will lead to those tougher conversations later. So the quicker you get those out the way, the stronger foundation you can build.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And then remember, this is also going to be a part of your personal financial plan, right? Obviously jointly, but if something happens, then it'll also be part of your plan. It's also going to be a plan of your children's if that's something that's part of the picture for you. And that's really important to be thinking about. I mean, anything from 529 plans to 401ks, do you want to start a business? All of those have to do with money, and they also have to do with your spouse, because particularly in states where it's a community property state, which California is. I know you sit in California. And you can just do a quick Google to see if your state is a community property state. But there's other things that you need to do, even logistically. And I think we're working on sort of a checklist for I just got married, what should I do, right? And some of those things you should be doing before you get married, but absolutely as you start your sort of life journey, you should be thinking about some of the financial things, including updating certain kinds of documents like life insurance and beneficiaries. And so those are really important. So, whether someone gets a prenup or they don't, I think it's an important conversation. I think everyone should think about that. I mean, it's a great question to even ask yourself. Is that something that I want to do? What does that mean? What assets am I bringing? What do I not want to lose control over, et cetera?
Absolutely. And, I love the concept of a checklist because it's so true. I work with clients all the time, right? And you'd be surprised how many people get married and they just completely forget that their 401k was in their sister's name or mom as a beneficiary. And it's like, it just doesn't trigger the fact that maybe they want to update that to their new spouse, or if they have children, they need to update those for the beneficiaries, So the concept of having that checklist is, all right, I just got married or I just got engaged. Mm-hmm. What conversations do we need to have? There's so many opportunities, even for savings, right? A lot of us have subscriptions and maybe different cell phone plans and car insurances that you might find some savings if you combine those, if you're getting married, right? So these are the kinds of things you want to start looking at.
Absolutely. So that leads us right into our second topic, which is sort of your household treasury management, right? Which is your cash flow, how you spend, what you spend on, and from what accounts you're spending from. All of those questions, super important. I think, look, we're in sort of tax season right now. Everyone's thinking about their money because they're having to pull their documents, right? This is a great time to be having a money date and to talk about sort of your finances while all of your documents are in front of you. And so you're it's top of mind. I know one of the questions that we get all the time is, should I have a joint account? I know my answer, so I'm going to hold that, and I want to hear from you first, because it's a choice, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a choice. But, I tell people, you're sharing a bed, you're sharing a home. There is some sort of level of sharing that you're doing, right? So finances should be no different. Obviously, we're all individuals and we want to keep our independence. But at the very least, at least to get started, if you haven't done so, there should be a joint account just for the household expenses that you're currently sharing, where monies get deposited. They don't necessarily need to be equal because obviously maybe one of you makes more than the other, but you agree on the amounts that are going to go in there. And then from that account, things start getting paid. And that could be just the simple stuff, right? Like the cable, electric, and so on. But I think it starts creating that trust of doing things together, right? And it creates transparency because at least the other person has an idea of what you're bringing to the table and that you can actually do things together, right? Then from there, you can say, we'll each have our own little checking accounts for our own daily expenses. One of the things I do with my clients is that I have them agree on a number that each of them is going to actually spend every week. They don't have to agree on what it's spent on, but just on the amount, right? Because you're joining these finances. So you know what? We're going to give each other $100 a week for whatever, right? Doesn't matter what you do with it. Doesn't matter what I do. You can buy shoes. I can go buy an expensive bottle of wine. Doesn't matter. We agreed on the amount. And it actually relieves some of that friction, which is part of the conversation that leads to those bigger problems.
That's right. So we both agree there should be a joint account. I will say this. I'm always looking out for women as it pertains to finance, especially given the fact that women tend to spend more in households than they do in their retirement. And so it's a bad outcome in terms of sort of how much their husbands have saved for retirement versus what they've saved. So my thing is also a joint account. And that's my suggestion. I love joint accounts. I think, one, it forces you to have a conversation about what are your fixed expenses. How much is your mortgage, your rent, your maybe insurance, utilities, basic groceries. It's going to force that conversation and to have that sort of plan, right? So what's your monthly budget? Use the joint or the house account to pay those things. It should also be used to pay for joint dinners, joint going outs, joint vacations, right? It is your joint account because, like I mentioned, what happens often is that women will end up splurging for things like, oh, let's go on vacation, let's go for a weekend, let's go to dinner. And then oftentimes they're spending their money instead of that, investing it where their partners are oftentimes investing that money. And so we want to make sure that shared expenses goes beyond just the fixed pieces of your budget, but also all of those little extra things that both of you enjoy, right? Because why should I be paying for something that we're both enjoying, right? And then you have your individual accounts, because I do think that autonomy, financial autonomy, and transparency is the way to go, right?
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned that, because they don't have to be separate. You can have autonomy and transparency at the same time. And I'm glad that you bring up women, because unfortunately, women have, historically been at a disadvantage when it comes to finances. Number one, they tend to spend less time in the workforce because typically they happen to be the caretakers, right? Whether it's having children or maybe taking care of the household. So that creates less money for them individually. They also contribute less to Social Security as a result, right? Mm-hmm. To add insult to injury, typically women make less than men for the same role, especially if you're a minority woman. So all these things combined really put you at a disadvantage. So you want to make sure that, yes, you have the transparency, the joint accounts, but you also have your autonomy and you do have your own savings. And let's say if your spouse happens to be the one that takes care of all the bills in terms of like logging into accounts, you want to know those passwords. You want to know what's due when, everything, because you want to be independent as well within the relationship. Nothing wrong with that.
That's right. And it's so easy these days. Lots of opportunities for using apps. And I know a lot of bank accounts now have like folders so that you can subdivide your cash management.
Love those.
I love those, right? Let's put this money aside. But there's a couple of other things I think in terms of just sort of money management that's important to have, because I think this is where there's the priorities around your marriage come up. A lot of people end up having to save for down payment, for example, and that should be a separate account that both of you start to contribute to. There should be conversations around sort of big purchases. Here's one for you that I've seen quite a bit, either in a girlfriend, boyfriend, sort of partnered relationship, and even in marriage, but where someone will say, "Oh, I'm going to surprise them. I'm going to buy a car for them." Well, they bought the car, but it's in both of their credits, right? It's a household payment. And so, while that seems very sweet, I discourage things like that, because you don't want to be making big asset purchases without the participation of your partner. And so that's a big one. The other thing, and you mentioned this earlier, which is, we have, it's not always equal. Like equality in the conversations we're talking about isn't always, it's 1-to-1, right? So oftentimes one person might make more than the other. And so when you're thinking about how much are you contributing, I think it's a really fair conversation to say, you have a number, but it could be a percentage. So I'm going to contribute 40% and you're going to contribute 40%. That end number is going to be different, but it's 40% of our take-home pay, right? And so coming up with those kinds of figures is really important, because you can then talk about, hey, you may make 3 times more than I do. And how are we going to handle that? How are we going to make sort of negotiations, and how are we going to talk about sort of some of that power dynamic? Because that can be uncomfortable, especially as you get deeper into a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the flip side to that could also be uncomfortable, where someone comes into the relationship with more debt than the other, so maybe you had student loans, right? You went to law school, medical school, whatever, and you have all the student loans and your spouse doesn't, right? But now it will impact the cash flow of the household, so you need to be transparent about those, because it's like, hey, listen, here's what I have, right? Like, don't hide from those things, because eventually it's going to come to light. And you're going to have joint goals that you want to work towards, like buying a home. So you want to make sure you're transparent about what you truthfully could contribute to it. It may not be equal. And that's okay, as long as you have the conversations and you agree upon it.
That's right. I think that's really important. And there's other, talking about credit, for example, I think that's a big one. And I don't want to get into the horrible things that can happen in a relationship, but I have seen quite often abuse of credit. So someone opening up a credit line with their spouse's name, but really their spouse doesn't know because there's a household. A lot of people have credit cards, multiple credit cards, and they don't realize that credit has been opened in their name. And that's a big one, right? And so, to the extent that that feels like a betrayal, it's a financial betrayal. And so those are really important things to be thinking about. And I would say for everyone, you should be looking at your credit reports and your credit history at least once a year to flag things like that. So perhaps you're like, what credit card is this? I didn't open this credit card. And your husband opened it up. So that's really important. The other thing, and this comes back to the spending habits, is, if one of the people in this relationship is a big spender and that debt, is on the books, when you get divorced, depending if it's a community property estate or not, that could be debt that you end up paying. So again, all of these transactions are going to come up in your day to day. And so what are some of the things that you can do? What are some of the things that you suggest? So we said, okay, joint checking accounts, but with a house account. Great idea. That seems to be the way to go. What other conversations should people be having about budgeting and credit?
Yeah, certainly. So I wanted to go back real quick about credit since you mentioned it. In order to protect yourself, definitely agree with the fact that you should be checking your credit regularly. Right now, you can do so for free. You can go to annualcreditreport.com. And the three major credit bureaus, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, have all made their credit reports available for free. I think you can check them as often as once a week. You probably don't need to check them that often, but it's free. Check to see if everything in there looks right. And if it is, and you actually have the opportunity to dispute it. Second thing regarding credit, this is something I do as well with my wife, also free. You can actually freeze your credit. And you have to visit each website independently, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. But what it does is you can go about your business like normal. So all your existing credit cards, everything works just the same. But it prevents anyone that has your social security number from opening up new credit unless you actually unfreeze. So even yourself, like you go into a car dealership and you forgot to unfreeze it, you can't get a car loan. Right? So it's a great tool and it's a free tool, just to prevent anyone that happens to have access to your information from opening up a fraudulent account. So annualcreditreport.com, and also just Google how to freeze your credit.
That's great.
In terms of your original question, yeah, joint account is one. I like the fact that a lot of banks are now offering the ability to have kind of subfolders or sub accounts within like a savings account, so you can allocate dollar amounts for different things. So I think couples should start looking ahead. You mentioned doing things that are joint that you both enjoy. Vacations are one of those, right? So just to give you an example and to keep the numbers simple, if you know you are going to spend about $6,000 a year on vacation, that translates into $500 a month. And if you get paid twice a month, it's $250, right? So you could probably each put $125 into this subfolder, into that savings account, right? So that when the year comes, that joint money is there, right? So we're not scrambling like, oh, well, maybe I'll charge it on this card to get the points and we'll figure out how to pay for it later. So put even your things that are not fixed expenses, put those in the budget as well and work backwards from there, because you want to give every single dollar a destination. Companies run on budgets, governments run on budget. The word budget gets a negative connotation because it sounds restrictive, right? Like diet. But you can budget for fun things too. Just make sure you put them in there.
Exactly. And hopefully, you guys are talking about that too, right? So that there's a mutual benefit in that vacation. Okay, great. So I think we talked a little bit about that cash management. And by the way, this is a great time to have a money date. And if you haven't seen our money date boxes that we've partnered with a great company that provides these questionnaires, we give them out at a lot of our Thrive events. So make sure you come to one of our Thrive events to get one, but you can also check out the Instagram for the money date box and get your own. It doesn't have to be stressful. You could be talking about money things that are about building together, about opening a business, about a second home. There's lots of great opportunities to talk about money and positive things. And I will say, like, that's part of like taking the shame out of it, that it's not about being negative. If you don't make enough money, or didn't make as much money as your partner, that's okay. Have those conversations and figure out how you can, right? How do you get to some parity there? So this is a good time, since we're in tax season and you're going to be pulling out all of your documents anyway. All right, let's get to the next topic of conversation, which is retirement planning. And we're going to sort of broaden that to really think about not only retirement planning, but also how do we take care of our parents, our families, but perhaps there's other children involved. Particularly for Black and Latino families, you see this often. We are, end up taking care of parents, or thinking already about sort of who's going to take care of them. And when we buy property, we often buy as a family unit. So there's a lot of sort of nuances, I think, in our families that I want us to consider as we have this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a key piece to generational wealth as well, because I find that a lot of people don't like to have the tough conversations, and they basically, it gets prolonged, but eventually it'll be worse at the end, right? So talking about retirement planning and taking care of your family as well, kind of tying it into estate planning also,
Right.
These are the kinds of things that you want to think ahead. For example, you mentioned children. Like, you don't need to be rich to start thinking about estate planning or even retirement planning, right? If you have minor children, just ask yourself what would happen if both parents happen to die, right? In traditional couples, it's very likely that you both go on vacation together, right? So God forbid something happened to the two of you. Like, is there a legal document where you're saying who this guardian person should be? You don't want to leave that up to a local judge that you've never met, right? So these are the kinds of things that, even if you don't have a ton of money, that you want to address. Guardianship for your kids, also end of life decisions. We had a pandemic, right, for several years. There were people that found themselves on a ventilator that would never thought, right? So you want to leave those decisions on paper, like, hey, yes, I want to be intubated or not, or whatever the case might be, right? Nobody likes to have those conversations, right? But having those conversations will not bring about the bad thing, right? Umbrellas don't make it rain.
Yes,
we all have car insurance, right? So we want to protect ourselves for other
right.
things.
Absolutely. And I think here's another key reason I wanted to talk about this, because as we know, there's an investment gap between the genders, between men and women. So men happen to have more investment accounts, and then across the board, right? 401ks, brokerage accounts. I always say that most men have multiple accounts, and because women are like, oh, I think he just has a 401k, or it's like, no, you better ask some more questions. And we encourage everyone to have multiple accounts. You should have your 401k, you should have an IRA. There might be a brokerage account in there, a Roth IRA. And so the reason I want us to talk about this is because, one is you got to make sure you update your beneficiaries, as you talked about, but also just looking at the parity in income together, right? So you're looking and you're saying, okay, I'm looking at what I'm giving and contributing. I'm not contributing as much as my partner. How do we make this more equal, right? Because that's really important for both of you. The other thing, and I'd love to hear your opinion about this, is that oftentimes one person in the relationship will take time off to care for the children. And I mean, generally it happens to be women, so they're taking time off from their career. And while they're doing that, they're not investing in their retirement plans. And so I wanted to kind of just flag that as, I know there's spousal IRAs, there's other Roth IRAs, there's other products that we can be thinking about. But just maybe walk us through that and what some advice you give to people as they're planning through their different retirement plans.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, Ramona, because it's definitely very overlooked. Oftentimes, like you said, it tends to be the woman that stays home with the children and out of the workforce and so on. And yeah, there is such a thing as a spousal IRA. So if you're married and your spouse has earned income, you can still contribute for the non-working spouse up to the IRA limits. So it was 6,500 last year, which you have until April 15th to do so, and 7,000 this year plus a $1,000 catch-up contribution if you're over the age of 50. So those are the kinds of things that you can definitely take advantage of, even if you didn't have quote unquote earned income, right? You were home taking care of the kids, your spouse worked. Definitely open up your own IRA and fund it, because you want to start thinking about the future. It's going to be a pre-tax contribution that you can definitely take advantage of today. So these are the kinds of questions that we want you to bring up to your financial advisors, your accountants, attorneys, right? Depending on what we're talking about, to be like, hey, what else should I be doing? We want to be proactive, not reactive when it comes to this stuff.
That's right. And I think that's why we always tell people to start thinking about it. So what's your end goal, right? It's not about the money. The money, we'll figure out the money piece, but the end goal is sort of, why are you doing this? What do you want to do? And I think that's really important. And I think this is where, when we talk about families and extended families, whether or not you buy a property big enough to have an extended home, for example, for your parents or for their grandparents, do you have a second property? Is that rented out to family? Is it not? I mean, there's so many different questions. And when we think about the products, I think that's another opportunity to be having these conversations and setting up the right products, whether you need to transfer property out of a parent's name and put it into someone else's name, into a trust, so that they can get their full benefits. Oftentimes what's happening is that folks are thinking about this. They're like, yeah, I'm going to take care of my parents. Both of the folks are talking about that, but they're not talking about it together. And so you think about, that's going to be at least 20 grand into your annual income if that's something that becomes really significant. So what does that look like? And what other tools do you need? Do you need to buy additional life insurance? Do you need to invest in different kinds of real estate? Right. So all of these kinds of questions should be coming up. And I think they're really important to address, giving yourself a good 5 years before the actual event takes place. Right. And I think, you're probably feeling this too right now. A lot of families are starting to have those conversations. My mom just had her birthday and she's 68, and I'm so happy. I hope she's, around for another 20 years. But, and what does that look like? Right? Whose house is she going to live at?
Yeah, I find that a lot of times, especially like in the Hispanic community, for the most part, people want to keep their elderly parents at home and not send them to like an assisted living facility, right? And, it's a cultural thing, but it's also very expensive to do here in the United States. I came from the Dominican Republic, and it was a lot easier for I grew up with my parents and my grandparents in the same household. But right now, everybody works, everybody has kids, jobs. Like it'll be super hard to actually have your parents, especially as they age and they need help, to live with you, right? And it's not impossible, but you have to start thinking about things like long-term care insurance. Maybe that's something, like you said, that you can start purchasing 5-10 years out, so that when that event comes, you have that resource there to say, you know what, we can keep him in our house, but we could afford to pay someone to come and take care of him, right? Or the opposite way, or if they have some assets, maybe they do some sort of like a Medicare trust or something like that, so that they can continue to get their benefits if they are on government assistance, and still be able to use those funds for their caretake. So there's a lot of different ways, but the point is, let's have these conversations and take some action now.
That's right. And there's other kinds of accounts that you need to be aware of, and I think that's what we're alluding to, is that the planning. Once you have a kind of a goal and you have a plan for it, then you can actually get the products that you need. And they're out there, and they're always cheaper the longer you sort of plan out, right? So we want to get people insured. We want to make sure that people are building that generational wealth, even if a marriage doesn't work out. And if you do it the right way and you're having these good conversations, it's going to be a lot easier on you. And particularly for my ladies out there, we want to make sure that you're not on the losing end of any financial transactions as a result of your marriage. So very quickly, I want to just go over some do's and some don'ts. Why don't we start with the do's? What are your 2 or 3 do's for people in a relationship or about to be in a long-term relationship?
Yeah, I like that. I think do for sure is have those conversations, the transparency. There is something called financial infidelity. Some of you may have heard it. And sometimes, you or your spouse might not tell each other something out of maybe even embarrassment, like, oh, I'm afraid to tell him or her that I have this much in student debt or credit card debt, right? But what happens is if it comes out eventually, right? Because let's say you decide to buy a house together, they're going to run your credits. And at some point, like, whoa, I didn't know you owed all this money, right? Then they're going to start thinking, well, what else are they hiding from me? And maybe you're not. There was just that one little thing because you were embarrassed. But now it creates that crack in the trust. And that's hard to come back from, right? So it's best to be upfront. So that's one of the do's to me is like, put it out there. That's the importance of having those money dates so that your spouse or partner knows exactly what you're bringing to the table, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? That's definitely one of the do's. Another do is going back to the initial conversation, definitely have joint goals together, right? Like you don't want to have you definitely want autonomy, but you don't want to have everything separately. You want to have at the very least that joint account and then a joint savings account for all the major goals, whether it's buying a home or even vacations, right? And then don't give up your independence. I would say you can have both, right? You can have transparency, but also, yes, do have your own credit card in your name, right? You want to have that identity because things happen, right? Whether it's death or divorce. So you don't want to have complete independence on the other person, whether it's credit or money, right?
Right. No, that's absolutely right. This is something that I've seen with a lot of my girls. I'm going to start with the don'ts, and then I'll get into the do's. Don't do co-signing for both boyfriends. I've seen it before, and don't do joint credit. Right. So I think that's a really hard one to do with your spouse, and so be careful about sort of your spending habits there. So on the do's, we want to make sure that you are being very aware of your finances. So do ask questions. I see this a lot with women. They bury their head in the sand, and it's not until divorce that they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize that the house was not in my name." I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. So check your titles, check your mortgage, make sure that everything is in order there. And then do create this time period to create times that are consistent. So the earlier you start sort of creating this routine of talking about money, the easier it's going to be, and it's not going to be sort of so uncomfortable. And we really want to make sure that all of this information is really in support of keeping people together and keeping them financially healthy, and so that they are creating that intergenerational wealth in their communities. So I want to say thanks to Luis Rosa for joining us today, and we look forward to having more conversations with you. Just a note, we were not able to take comments from this live stream, but we have a link in the comments section where you can give us your email. You can ask us further questions, any personal questions related to your experience. And then we will also be sending you out a guide of 11 money questions and checklists for you. So look forward to having you next time, Luis. Thanks.
Thank you, Ramona. It's a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want the 11 questions guide and checklist that Ramona mentioned during the episode, just send us an email, luis@onmywaytowealth.com, and we'll just send it right back to you. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Take care. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.